In this video tutorial, we're going to be talking about the Merge Aperture function here inside Pixel Creator Pro. And it's actually a very useful function, and if you understand the various options, I think you'll find yourself using that function quite a bit when you're doing your custom layout designs here inside Photoshop. So let's start off by just a basic example of what Merge Aperture does. What we can do is I can make a selection, choose Add Aperture. That of course will create a new image layer, and then I'm going to take this layer and duplicate it. So I'm just going to hold down my Alt key or Option key for you Mac folks and click and drag one more time. Okay, pretty basic stuff. We created 3 image openings. I'm going to select those 3 and just click on this little button here inside Photoshop. It says Distribute Horizontal Centers, and that will make the spacing in between each of those boxes identical. Now what we have, of course, is we have 3 image openings, one on each individual layer. Now if you look over here in your layers palette, you can see we have this little black and white thumbnail on every layer. These are layer masks here inside Photoshop, and they're bitmap layer masks because they are black and white. If they were gray and white, then that would be representing a vector layer mask. Now, there are some unique capabilities that you have with bitmap layer masks, some unique capabilities that you have with vector layer masks. So depending on the situation, one may be a better option than the other. So let me talk about what Merge Aperture does. What Merge Aperture is going to do is if I were to select all 3 of those image boxes and I click Merge Apertures, watch what Pixel Creator Pro does. It gives us the option, because it detects that we have a bitmap layer mask, says, do you want to convert to vector, yes or no? For this example, we're just going to say no. And it's just going to go ahead, boom, all 3 of those layers are together, and now the layer masks that were applied to each one of those layers have now been merged into one new layer mask. So if I were to go and insert an image, that image would cascade across all 3 boxes. Well, let's talk about maybe a little bit more practical example now that you understand the basic function. Let's go ahead and make a selection, more or less square, and use the Quick Divide tool here in Pixel Creator Pro. We'll talk more about Quick Divide in another video, but what we're going to do is take our current selection, divide it vertically by 3 image openings with a 1/4 inch spacing, horizontally by 3 images with a 1/4 inch spacing, horizontally. We're going to create some image layers and create some guidelines and hit divide. And what Pixel Creator Pro does is simply take our selection and divides it into 9 image openings. Pretty straightforward stuff. Now we're going to delete a couple of these boxes. Each box is created on its own separate layer. And then I'm going to free transform a box, snapping to the guidelines. So we have a configuration that looks something like this. Now each one of these boxes is on its own separate layer. And depending on the circumstances, that may be exactly what we're looking to do. But the advantage with Merge Apertures is every time that we want to use this configuration of boxes, we don't want to have to go through and use the Quick Divide and delete layers and free transform and all that monkey business, because we've already done it once. Why do we want to do it over and over again? So what we're going to do here is we're going to actually convert and create a reusable configuration of image openings. So all I need to do is select all the appropriate layers, and you notice that when I kind of make this marquee selection, as I cross over those layers, they all get selected here in the layers panel. So when I'm in my move tool, up here in the options bar in Photoshop, if I have auto select layer chosen or auto select group chosen, as I click and drag and marquee over those layers, it will auto select those layers. Very useful and handy when we're doing album design. So back to Merge Aperture. Now it detected that we have bitmap layer masks, and do we want to convert? For this example, we're going to say yes. So first things first, it's converting each one of those bitmap layer masks to vector, and then it's just simply going to combine all those vectors into one new layer. Pretty straightforward stuff. Now I'll say, well, what's the significance of that? Well, because we have a vector layer mask, we can take advantage of another function here inside Photoshop, and that is the ability to save this configuration of boxes as a custom shape. So when I come into the Edit menu here in Photoshop and choose Define Custom Shape, if this is grayed out, one of 2 things is happening. Either A, I don't have a vector layer mask, or B, the vector layer mask is not currently selected. So when I hit Define Custom Shape, up comes the name dialog box. I could give it a name if I wanted to. When I hit OK, I now have a reusable custom shape. So when I come into my custom shape tool here in Photoshop, if I click on this button, there is that new configuration that I just created. See that? And I just click and drag. Boom. There is my configuration. Now, in certain circumstances, it may be nice to insert an image opening and have that image opening cascade into all of those image openings. You see that a lot in album design. So here's an image. I hit Insert Photo with Pixel Creator Pro. It detects the size of my shape and the size of my image, scales it appropriately, and drops it into place for me, and that image cascades across all of those boxes. And in certain circumstances, that may be the exact effect that we're looking for. Now, more often than not, however, we're probably going to want to use this configuration of boxes, but we want each box to be on its own separate image layer. And that's why we created this little mystery tool next to Add Aperture, this little gray button. It says Break Apart. So when I click on that button, it's going to take each one of those boxes and convert each box to its own separate layer. And so now each one of those boxes can be populated individually using Pixel Creator Pro. And of course, we can move each one of these layers individually as well if we need to. So if I want to delete those 3 layers and just use these 3, pretty straightforward stuff to do. So that Merge Aperture function can be quite useful. Now, we can also show you a couple other examples. Like, for example, I'm going to just drag out a rectangle. And then I'm going to use one of our custom shapes. So I'm going to actually come in here and take a look at Edge Flourishes. This is from our PhotoPerk library of custom shapes. There's about 30 different sets of design elements that is a part of our PhotoPerks library. It can really add some visual interest to your layouts. So I'm going to go ahead and drag out this shape, move it into position, and you can see I've created a separate layer for this shape. So if I select those 2 shape layers and I click on Merge Apertures, it's going to combine those into one new shape. And likewise, I can choose Define Custom Shape. So now, when I go back to reuse that configuration again, look at here, right here on the bottom, there is that configuration. And I just click and drag, and I can recreate that rectangular image opening with my little floral edge as one step. I don't have to make multiple steps. So if I come in here and grab an image, certain images could have a really nice effect. Again, that image is going to fill in the whole shape. I'm just going to flip it around. You can see how beautiful that looks because that image is actually filling in my rectangle as well as a little floral element that I added to it. So you can have a lot of fun working with custom shapes. Another quick example, just to kind of get the ideas flowing for you. Let's go into Photoblocks Volume 1. Switch over to those custom shapes. I'm going to use, and you can use shapes from different libraries. You don't have to use from one library, but I'm just going to go ahead and drag out my rectangle here, and then I'm going to grab my butterflies, add it to the top, and then maybe this little bit of scroll work, add it to the bottom, and you can see that now we have 3 layers and we have 3 different elements that we added to it. So I'm just going to select all 3 elements and click Merge. And it's just going to take each one of those layers and combine them together. I'm going to click on my vector layer mask, and I'm going to use my rectangle tool here inside Photoshop, and I'm simply going to hold down my Alt key and click and drag to actually subtract one portion of my shape, my newfound shape. And isn't that a fun little frame? So for example, I could come in here, let's add a little bit of texture to this. So I'm going to add a little bit of texture to my frame, and it's going to fill in all the areas that are red with my pretty blue texture. You see there? So that's kind of fun. And then I'm just going to make a selection like so, and go back to my images here and hit insert photo right into my selection that I have made. And so Pixel Creator is going to resize my image to fit my selection. And how fun is that? So really, really simple to do. Now there is one more thing I want to show you before I let you go on Merge Apertures and let you explore. There are going to be times when you use that Merge Aperture tool, especially when we're talking with our custom shaped options, where you may get an error message. And depending on the complexity of the design element that you're using, it may confuse Photoshop and say, geez, I don't know how to merge this, you got too much going on, I don't know what to do. So in the event that you would get an error message, I want to educate you a little bit on Photoshop and what Merge Aperture is really doing, so in the event it's too complicated of a merge, you know how to do it manually in Photoshop. So let's just recreate this design element quickly. So we're going to add those three pieces again. And there we have each one of those pieces. Essentially what happens when we select all three layers and we click Merge Aperture, it's a very complex thing that Photoshop does for us automatically. So what it does is it detects the currently selected layers, and one by one it takes the vector layer masks, it copies it, and then it takes the bottommost layer, pastes that vector layer mask to the bottommost layer's vector layer mask, comes back, deletes that layer, and so on and so forth. So it's a very, multiple steps are involved. So it's very sophisticated, but like I said, sometimes, depending on the complexity of the design, it can be very confusing for Photoshop and it just gives you an error message. So how do we do it manually in Photoshop? Well, it's pretty straightforward. We have three layers that we want to combine into one. So I click on the vector layer mask of one layer, and I choose Edit and Copy. We could use a keyboard shortcut as well. Click on the bottommost layer that I want to add that to. Make sure you clicked on the vector layer mask and then paste. So Control V or Command V if you're on a Mac. And then I can delete that layer that I just copied over. And then do the same thing with the last layer. I just click on the vector layer mask, Control C to copy, down here, paste, Control V, and then I can delete that layer. And you can see it has the same end result. I still have a vector layer mask with all three pieces on it. I am then going to use that rectangle tool and subtract a little piece out. So I have a pretty little frame there, and because I have a new vector layer mask, I click on that vector layer mask, choose Edit, Define Custom Shape, and then when I come in here to my Custom Shape tool in Photoshop, there is that cool little frame that we just selected. So I just drag it out and make it as big as I want. Pretty fun stuff. So that's the advantage of working with shape layers inside Photoshop. We can scale them to any size we want without any loss of image quality. And by using that Merge Aperture function, we can combine individual design elements to create something completely unique. Anyone can buy a template or use one of our pre-designed design elements, but once you've taken these individual pieces and create something completely unique to you, now you've got something special to you because you created it using all those individual pieces. And now you have the tools to understand some of the functions with our custom shape tool in Photoshop and some of the different options available to you with Merge Apertures. And now you just have to let your creative mind go and figure out some other options that you have with that Merge Aperture tool.